I'm delighted to introduce to you Craig Foden and Sally Morris. Now, they are both manual therapists and at expert level, and they specialise in myofascial release, which was designed and created by John F. Barnes. Now, I've got a vested interest in this, and I'll be really honest with you because I have been going to Sally now for about 20 months, and I can't tell you the difference that it's made to me. Well, I will be during the show, but I'm really delighted to have you both on the show. Thank you very much for joining me. And I know not only do you engage in the therapy, but both act as educators, tutors, and trainers for other people. So, welcome to the show. Thank you very much. Now,
Good
let's
to be
start.
here.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're so lovely to see you. Craig, tell me about how you managed to get into myofascial work.
It, well, my journey started by being curious about anatomy training on the back of being, again, involved in some martial arts study. I wanted to be safe in my training, realized that my my education, and then I started out as a typographic designer, but wasn't really connecting with the advertising world. And so I found myself signing up to a massage therapy course in my home city of Sheffield. And it was such a great learning experience. Qualified, I was very pleased about that. And I ended up being asked to rejoin the next year's course with a busy year of two groups as a teaching assistant, which I jumped at the chance and seeing there was far more to learn. And then was nudged into becoming a tutor in massage therapy, and then kind of I'd heard about John Bond's myofascial release as part of the bit more advanced soft tissue therapy canon. And I'll probably let Sally explain. I mean, I'd done some study in the UK, but then it was Sally who journeyed to America to study with John, seminars with the experts, and then worked on me. And my body felt the sort of benefits of that as my body started to unwind. And I immediately knew this. I could see Sally was uh, excited about this modality. And then I knew when I felt this in my own body that it was super authentic. And I then started my journey into studying myofascial release and getting myself to America.
Brilliant. Sally, what's your journey into myofascial release?
Um, I think I've always been looking for something that uh, something powerful for people because I noticed that it wasn't enough just to work with the mind. It wasn't enough just to work with the body. It wasn't enough just to work with emotions. This modality sort of brings everything together. So it's the connection between all things, in my opinion. So I was a massage. I started off in nursing, but then I was a massage therapist for a long time and kept taking courses and I think I'd done coaching and counseling and all sorts of things. And somebody treated me and they were rebalancing my pelvis. And I
As you
said,
do.
yeah. And I was really intrigued about that. And I said, well, I really want to learn those skills because I was always looking to improve what I can offer for clients. And so went on the training in the UK and found that it was way more than just balancing somebody's pelvis. It was really holding space for people, and it was, in my opinion, authentic healing. So I thought I'd done a great job training in the UK, and then I decided I would take the next step and go and train with John Barnes, and that was a whole other level of um, training, experience, release, um, transformation for me. And once I experienced that, then my world changed. As soon as I came back from training in America, I had lots of different kinds of clients coming to me immediately while I was out in America. I was getting emails from people asking if I could help them. I remember the first man I came back to treating, the new client, had a problem with his shoulder, and I never touched his shoulder, and he got off the couch and said, "That's amazing." And so that was the start. It was like as soon as I stepped into that world, then people started to come. It was like a magnet for people. And the same has happened for Craig. So that, it was my own journey, my own healing. Um, John Barnes says you can't take your clients, any further than you've gone yourself. You have to, what's the actual?
You can only take
Only
your
take
clients as deep as you're willing to go yourself. I think that's the
Yeah.
one.
I think that's probably true of most of
Mm.
the deeper modalities, that you
Yeah.
actually, it's healing, taking responsibility for your own healing that actually moves things on. Now,
Mm.
many people will be listening to this thinking, what on earth is myofascia release? Um, I'll tell you, no, I'll ask you to describe it, and then I'll tell you how I describe it, and you can tell me whether I've got it right or wrong. So, who's going to share what it actually is and does?
Ooh, good question. So the myo means muscle, and the fascia is pertaining to the connective tissue fascia. And so, as it turns out, we were all taught from the same books and lineage of anatomy study, which did historically focus specifically on muscles and sort of lever concepts. And it was only until really within the last sort of 20 years that it the fascial anatomy study came out, and we all became aware the sort of the importance of this ubiquitous tissue. And so I think the phrase John's own journey was interesting in itself. He got injured his
Mm.
back severely. No one wanted to get better than he did. He was in lots of pain. I think he had a spinal fusion and then was working on himself. He was a physical therapist, a physiotherapist at the time. And he started to work on himself, was trying to bull through the restrictions and ease pain. And, a kind of voice said, ease up, slow down. And his body started to move and unwind, and the pain massively reduced. So he got kind of curious. So the term myofascial release, I think he inherited from, I think it was coined from an osteopathic lineage. And that best kind of described, I think, where what he was starting to feel under his hands, started working with people being centered, tuning into their bodies. And that's some of the history of where the phrase comes from. So the fascia is replete, it works in intrinsic ways, in a biotensegrable way throughout the whole body. It's the environment of every cell in our body we now know. So it's a very important tissue that contains plethora, if not most, of the sort of nerve fibers in the body.
The way I describe it to people is, if you buy a piece of pork loin, there's a very thin sheath of uh, white that encases that, which is in, if you're trying to trim that off in order to cook your pork loin, it's really, really tough. And it's very, very thin and quite hard to get hold of. And certainly from being on the experiencing of it end, you know, I find it quite magical that be working in one part of the body, and I work with both Sally and another myofascia um, uh, therapist, and so they'll be working on different parts, and then suddenly there's no noise and it doesn't click, but it's as if it goes click, 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 click from one end to the other, and it sort of releases. And the result for me has been quite profound. Those of you that have listened to the show for a long time know that I've been a wheelchair user for many years. My mobility is limited. I struggle to drive any length of distance. And I found that my walking has improved. I can drive further. I can work at the computer longer without experiencing pain. And so it was a bit slow to start with. And I'd go back the next month and I'd be back to almost where I started. But now I'm really reaping the benefits of that. And so if you imagine your muscles, nothing's disconnected. You know, the old song, your toe bone's connected to your foot bone. That's very true of the body. I'm fascinated, Sally, that that you had done some training in this country, but
Mm.
then you went and actually learnt from the man himself. and that was different. Why do you think it was so different? Was it just his teaching, or was it the whole experience and how that was organized?
Well, I went to the source, and I think I've always sought the best training, always. And going to the source is very different from learning from somebody. It dilute. I don't want to be disrespectful, but there is a dilution, and also everybody who teaches has their own perspectives and there's slightly different ways. So, going to see him was very different. The training was very more intense. I would say it was more intense. He has a lot of people in the room. That space is held by lots of assistants. But he himself talks about channel 3 and channel 5. And he talks about the space in which we inhabit as therapists and clients. It's not just the therapist, it's the client as well, where we sink into this more creative, um, uh,
Connected. Yeah.
connected,
Centered.
centered space.
Working together.
It's the hypnagogic space as well, where just before you fall asleep, you really do soften into your body and you do really allow things to let go. And it's so the clients get into that space, but the therapists get into that space as well, where we're very centered and open. And I think one of the big differences with John Barnes' training is that he ensures that the people in the room are entering that space as they put their hands on another human being. So it's all about the presence and the connection and allowing things to unfold rather than forcing tissues, which is what he would say is the old way. So we don't force anything. We put our hands on and we allow our hands to sink, and then we create an elongation. That fascial tissue is a connected tissue that runs, as you said, I mean, it was beautifully put, but it surrounds every single cell of your body. And so it, 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 it is everywhere and connects everything to everything else. There's um, some that are considering bone as fascial tissue, blood as fascial tissue. So, it goes beyond. Yeah, it really is being explored now that we have a lot of anatomists who acknowledge the fascial tissue. It's now being explored and researched in different ways so that we can understand more about what it is. But in terms of the therapy, my own feeling is it's that level of presence that we bring to another human being, and that's where things are very powerful. So there are physical effects of that slow sustained pressure over time. It's over time that makes it that creates the effect of that. So, it's not just about putting your hands on, it's actually sinking into those tissues. We hold what's called the barrier in those tissues, and we wait for those tissues to respond. And it actually hydrates the tissues. I mean, basically, under our hands, that's what we're feeling. We're feeling shifts and releases, and so is the client, as you said. And then it allows the whole body to
Connect. One of the phrases some of the dialogue we'll use, and this is important to reiterate that we're patients. This is ongoing to learn to be a therapist and utilize this practice. It's as much as about being in treatment, receiving that, swapping that, learning about how you feel the different skill levels, how you're held in as the body starts to unfold and can unwind and move of its own volition, which we can talk about in a moment. But it's as much about receiving, and it's the letting go, the trusting in that space and working 50-50. Many other practices that we've all been taught and we've worked with are the kind of more doing, the mobilizing, the soft tissue mobilizations, which are still very useful, very therapeutic, and very valid. And we will sometimes move and do some kind of what we term, John terms as sort of the direct myofascial techniques, akin to the kind of slightly the sort of rolfing approach of fascial work. And we do utilize that, but it's at all times it's in a very listening way. We're both working together, and that may switch into a sustained pressures, the indirect, which is the real key of John Bone's myofascial release.
The
Is
slow
slow
sustain.
sustained pressure at the barrier. If you're too light, you'll swim around in the elastic component. John calls it fool's gold. So there's got to be the sensitivity of being at the correct depth, staying put, and then yeah, following the releases sort of dynamically in multiple directions.
So we're feeling through our hands into the whole body, and we're feeling for those areas of restriction, and we're supporting the body. The body has wisdom. Each person's body, everybody has tremendous wisdom and capability for healing. And so um, that's where we stay present and allow the body to do what it needs to do in order to release.
Before the break, we were talking about what myofascia actually is, but I think for people who are listening to this, sometimes it has more resonance when they know what sort of conditions it can help. And I know it's certainly made such a huge difference to me. But perhaps you could, both of you, give us some examples of the sort of treatments or the sort of conditions that you've been able to treat and how it's helped people. So do you want to go first, Craig?
Sure, yeah, well, it is really it's quite a multitude of conditions really because it can be through say surgery, injury. I think the academic phrase is it creates a soft tissue insult. So there may be repair and the haphazard repair of collagen fiber into those injury sites. And so that might create scar tissue and restrictions. So it can be through injury, it may be postural, but also the link in here is if someone has had, psychological, physical, if there's been traumas, the body is then living in a kind of fearful state. There's a bracing that's got stuck, and we're using the best language we can try to describe this. The body's living in fear. It's kind of in a braced position, and it's reliving that on a daily basis. And so the tissue can bind down, compress on nerves, and this can affect sort of nutrients getting in, oxygen, and waste getting out. So with it being replete through the body, as you might imagine, this can have a accruing effect of stifling that kind of movement and natural flow of the body's systems. And so it can be a multitude of injuries or conditions that it's really relevant to us that it affects the whole body and kind of sort of consequences in there. So there's other ways to keep your fascia healthy, good hydration, food, all of the usual things. But there's a real connection in working in this way. And as some of the science is telling us, an increase in fluidity in the fluid component of the myofascial
Yeah,
complex,
the hydration.
the hydration into the tissues, and there's this resonance and real connection through the entire body. So there's a nice little. If I just demonstrate this on my top here, a good way to sort of think about myofascial restrictions and gripping in the tissue. Like if I put a rook and a bind through the myofascial web, I may get a pull into the shoulder. Think, oh, my shoulder's sore. We may work on the shoulder, but we're looking so oftentimes where's that pull and restriction from, and with this sort of treatment, we can sink into that, help the tissues to remember, unfurl from those binding positions, and get that sort of back into a more uh, less restricted state. Which yes, sometimes posture has an effect on that, but the body's really adaptive, so we can't just jump on postural discrepancies as being a marker of restriction, but it can be a clue into where the pulling in the tissues is.
One
So
of the
we
things that, sorry to
generally,
interrupt you, but fascinates me
yeah,
is that I am always asked to stand and to turn slowly round. And very often, I'm all over the place. I've got one shoulder, one hip higher, fall more forward. But by the end of a session, I'm all straight. And I think, for people who've got backache or shoulder ache or whatever ache,
Mm.
it's something to think about. So, sorry, Sally, I interrupted you. What
I
other
was just
things do
about to
you do?
say that, well, what I was going to just reiterate, I mean, he said it so perfectly. Well done, Craig. Um, but it was more like the clients that come to us are often coming in pain and restriction. So they're not moving as well, they have discomfort, pain, but also with various conditions. I had a chap last week with Parkinson's, have a lot of people with scar tissue, have a lot of people with back pain, shoulder pain, injuries here, there, emotional issues, generally quite complex. We also treat a lot of people with fibromyalgia, long COVID. There's no end to the kind of people that we can treat, because those are labels.
Yeah.
And so we treat their bodies, that we help to reconnect them to their bodies. Yeah, so people come for all sorts of reasons. um, and yeah, we may treat somewhere that's distant to where they have the issue, because wherever the pain is, we look elsewhere for the cause, which was demonstrated beautifully by his gilet. It's like, there's the restriction. It may be causing a problem here, a hip, a back, but actually we're feeling for where the cause is rather than the symptoms.
I'm struck really because I've recommended several people come to you. And I can remember one of my friends coming back and saying, I went for my shoulders, which were giving me absolute jip. And through the treatment, what I realized is that I was holding on to trauma from my childhood. And I felt as if I had to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. And as that released, so she felt better about herself, more confident, and able to go forward in a very different way. And I think we are so used to separating ourselves into physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and actually we come as a package. I want to explore with you, if I may, the
Mm.
issue of permission. You, I
Mm.
think, Craig, talked about trust. And,
Mm.
if you imagine yourself in your underwear on the listeners, on a treatment table, and I have to say, at times find yourself in some really quite interesting positions, that there has to be that sense of trust that you are allowing somebody to work on you. Um, what view do you have around how important it is for people to give permission to let you in to their very personal space?
My feeling is that that has a lot to do with the Channel 3 space, though, because we're not trying to fix anyone. We're not trying to force anything. We come with uh, that presence and openness to our clients. And so there's not that sense that there's anything wrong with them. We're there to meet them wherever they're ready to be met.
Yes,
We're not trying to force them to be anything other than they are. And we listen. Oh, we listen.
yes,
Um, and we don't judge, and all of those things. So that's present in our hands and in our voices and in our being when they enter the room, and that is present in our hands when we touch them. And so I think that the level of trust that engenders is so much more than when you go to a therapist who has their own agenda on what's wrong with you and what you need. You need this. That's not what we do.
no. I
You
think the
know,
listening thing and
yeah.
the non-judgmental, whether you're talking about a traditional medical route or you're a
Mm,
therapist of many sorts,
mm,
and I work as a coach with many therapists who have, as you say, their own agenda.
mm,
It's all about that's not how they might see it at the beginning, is about them. But ultimately, I think having that space which is all directed at the needs of whoever you're working with, I think one of the reasons that it's so powerful is that it's quite rare these days to go
Mm,
to anywhere and know that you are absolutely the center of what's going on and people are listening, not just to what you say, but to what you're
mm,
not saying and to what your body is saying, which may not be
mm,
the same thing.
mm,
Yeah, for sure. Finally, if I can just track us back to the comments as well about, because we started this little section about in treatments and being stood in position to be observed.
mm,
Some of, well, evidence, a lot of evidence says, look, there's the postural discrepancies may not mean too much. Some people can have a scoliosis in the spine, and
fine.
they're getting on just fine. Other people, they're in lots of pain for
Mm,
varied reasons. And so doing this and starting this part of the observation is actually being curious about how does it feel for someone to inhabit their body,
Yeah.
which doesn't get talked about in this sort of like anatomical, postural, scientific
yeah, we're not
perspective.
looking.
We're not kind of looking like that, you know. We're aware of the evidence, and it's super important. Look, we're keen as mustard to be up to date and adapting our language to be aware of the science that helps out. But we want to know how it feels for someone to inhabit the body. If this is really sort of a trust issue for them, we'll have had a chat and talk about that. We may go straight to the table, and that may be the first place where we're conscious of this working together to get this trust of letting go to inhabit and be in the
Yeah.
body. And so the talking therapies are great up to a point, but there's this realization that we're not separate. We need to get into the body to feel and be inhabit our bodies.
I think many people are afraid of
Yeah,
feeling, aren't they? People find it
yeah, but
difficult to
I
feel.
think when, well, rather than pushing people to feel, it's more a question of bringing their awareness
Yeah.
to what's happening here, rather than what is it you're feeling?
Yeah.
It's like, are you aware of, bring your attention to your breathing. Are you aware that you're leaning forward when you're standing? We don't say, are you, we say, how do you feel in your feet? What's happening? Are you weight more on one foot than the other? Bringing their attention to how they are, not with any judgment, putting our hands on, and lots of things happen that change that. So one of the biggest things we ask people afterwards is what feels different, and like you've said, everything feels different afterwards. You stand up, and because you're aware, you're much more aware, and you're inhabiting your body, you're in there, and awareness. Without awareness, there's no choice. That's another John Barnes saying. It's like, so we allow people to be more aware of what's happening physically, emotionally, mentally, and then they have choice. Then they have full choice.
I mean, one of the reasons I was so keen for you to come on the show is to share with people. And since my ski accident in 1983, I've done pretty well every modality that I have found. And some of them have worked for a little while, but then they have stopped working.
Mm,
And I think, 18 months in, I'm still seeing significant improvements, not necessarily month on month, but if I look back 3 months to what I was doing and what I can do now, with less pain or pain free, it's very different. But you will always say at the end of a session, how are you feeling? And I was thinking about this last night. I had a session yesterday, and what strikes me is I feel taller, I feel more open, and things feel freer. And I think for
yeah.
everybody, whether you've got an injury or an illness, having that opportunity is something
Mm,
that is for me a real gift. And
mm,
I just wanted to share it with people who, listen to the show. We're going to go for a short break in a minute. And when we come back, there's another facet to the work that you do,
yes.
which is around going to festivals. And you're not going as a a participant, you're not going as a celebrity. You have a very different role at these festivals and have had a long history of that. And I'd like you to share it because I think many people will be surprised at what you do and who you've met and how it's gone. Sally, was it you who first started at the festivals or was it you, Craig? It was Sally. Okay. Tell us
Oh
how you
boy.
got into doing festivals.
So Gina, it was in when I was doing more coaching and I was working with a client. I'd been working with him for some time. And as you know, we're always forwarding the action and challenging. And one day at the end of a session, he said to me, "Well, how about you? What are you going to do next?" And I literally said, well, you know what? I think I might quite fancy working at Glastonbury Festival backstage. And literally just challenged myself on that. I had worked at another festival and I had worked with Amy Winehouse and several other stars. So I had some form, but this was in the days where you could just phone up the office at Glastonbury. So I phoned them and I spoke to a lovely man, and he put me in touch with another lovely man who worked at what was the John Peel stage. And so I began working at festivals more seriously. So I put together a team. There were three of us the first year. Now we're still at Glastonbury Festival. We've actually worked at more or less most stages there, actually, one way or another. And we've worked, so we centre at Silver Haze, which is a huge area at Glastonbury, but we've worked at most other stages as well, including Pyramid and the other stage, which is the big ones. And and that led to many other festivals and events and offices and yeah, so it's been a fun ride. It's been a great ride, hasn't it?
Yeah, we're still doing some of it. Yeah, there's still some core festivals we're still doing, and
Yeah.
and it's actually how I got to work with Sally. I think a few years ago, Sally was looking for a few more team members as a few more festival gigs were expanding. And my initial massage mentor had mentioned Sally and had kind of highlighted her as being someone to kind of, you know,
Yeah.
hang out with. I can't remember her words, but she said, you need to sort of, yeah, she's a force or a character, let's say. So that piqued my interest. But Sally sent an email looking for team members for festival teams. And I was a few years in and she was asking for a bit of chair massage experience. And I'll be perfectly honest, I blagged that because I'd done mainly table work. I was very, let's say, keen, and I wanted to get a leg in, and it had taken me 30 odd years to realize that sometimes when you really want something, you've got to be a little bit cheeky to get the foot in the door. And it paid off well because I was and I think I admitted this to Sally a couple of years later after we'd become friends, and eventually I think 2 or 3 years in I got invited onto the Glastonbury team. But I fessed up and said, look, I was looking over my shoulder and I was checking out these chair techniques, and I think I did a fairly good
You
job.
adapted very
I
well,
adapted
Pete.
very quickly and very well. As I said, I was relatively confident in my skills. So that's how we became friends. I was training as a massage tutor, and I think Sally saw in me. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
kind of
he's okay.
he's okay. He's doing all right.
So we started, that was Bearded Theory Festival several years ago. We don't work that one now, but yeah, we just it took off. We worked backstage with artists and crew. To be honest, I've always loved working with crew because we always felt part of the team where we worked. So Glastonbury's been a long, long time. So there's a fallow year next year, and then the year after it will be 20 years since I started working there at
Wow.
John Peel stage. And now we have yeah, we used to work at BBC Introducing and we've worked at West Holts and I worked on Neil Diamond at the Pyramid stage and last year was Buster Rhymes at the other stage. And so my kids think I'm very cool. Their friends think I'm very cool. Because often a lot of the artists that they know and love I've worked with. So yeah, it's good. It's good fun.
Why, bearing in mind that, you think it's fairly free and people are going to do their set on stage, but they're not exactly coal mining, why is it so important that they have the opportunity to
Oh,
have massage?
that's a great question. Because of all the reason, I mean, very often the artists and the crew, they're working really, really hard. The artists have often been on tour, they're exhausted. They have their own occupational stresses. So we find that working with musicians is whatever they're doing. So if they're playing guitar, they have their own occupational stresses with whatever it is they're doing and their own myofascial restrictions. Um, they've been in tour buses, they've been exhausted, there's no sleep. Um, and that goes for crew too. It's like keeping a festival going requires a tremendous amount of effort and stress. So we've always felt that so we've worked with people pre and post performance and the crew too. We've always felt it's really important, and we're part of keeping that oiling that machine that keeps everything going. Um, we've literally taped people's ankles before they've gone on stage. One drummer, I remember, we taped his ankle because he'd had an ankle injury, and he said he wouldn't have been able to play if it hadn't been for that. That's one thing we've done. We've worked with artists who are now very, very famous and basically in their early days were very scared about going on to the biggest stage in their life. And we actually helped work with them and relax them and ease their voices before they've gone on stage. So we've Neil Diamond required, his physio was not available because she was ill. That's why I got called in. So I helped him prepare to go on stage and perform. Um, so it's essential as far, and in terms of mental health as well, it's very demanding and exacting, and there are a lot of people who find their mental health suffers because of the demands of that environment. So I think we help in all sorts of ways. We do offer myofascial release. That one of the things that's changed in the time that we've been doing this is that as our skill set has changed, then we bring that to the table, literally to the table. And there are a lot of artists who've really benefited from the myofascial work that we do and have said, what was that? Because I'd like more of that, which is one of the biggest things we hear all the time with clients. They're like, what was that? What was that? I've never felt so good. You said about how you felt after as well. For me, what most people say is I feel so much lighter.
Hmm.
So it's like that pressure's taken off. And so imagine that if they're exhausted,
Yeah.
we give them back, we resource them in terms of their physical, mental, emotional health, and they go and perform the best they've performed, then I feel we've done a good job.
Do you get an opportunity to actually engage in the festival bit? Are you working all the time? How does that work?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, we work kind of well, Glastonbury work a shift system, and so we're in there working most days at the festival is all of the days that the festival's on. But we get a little bit of organisation to say, okay, there's a gig in the afternoon, a really artist I want to see, so we'll flag those up a little bit and work around that. So we thoroughly get to enjoy the music and all part of it. Yeah,
It's
that's for sure.
we talk about channel 3 and being in that intuitive, creative, present state. That's another reason to love working at festivals with the artists and crew because that's where they're at. They're
Yeah.
such creative individuals and they love what they do and they bring all of that. And we are the luckiest people because we've often been backstage, side of stage, watching all these artists that we adore and meeting them. But
Yeah.
not only that, Gina, I got to meet Deepak Chopra
Wow.
3 years ago. Yes,
He's on my
yes, it's
bucket
not
list. I'd
just
love to
about
meet him. Yes.
musicians,
Yeah.
right? I'll share the photo with you of him and I backstage. And you know what? He gave a talk to well, I helped it happen. There's a whole other story.
Go on, we've got
But
time.
he gave us he gave a talk on one of the smallest stages that we have in the Silver Haze environment. He'd already done a big talk somewhere else, but he was invited to this information stage that is on Silver Haze area. And he wasn't actually going to go on because it was in the morning and there were a lot of people just hanging around and nobody was there really there to listen to him. And his tour manager was kind of, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do this. So I went out with a megaphone.
As you do.
As you do, because I was determined to see him speak, and I went out with this megaphone. I said, "Do you understand? We've got one of the best spiritual guided meditator here. Come, come." And anyway, they all started to come, and we filled this space. And he went on stage, and he led a meditation that will stay with me forever. You could, like, in the middle of the festival, you could have heard a pin drop, but the music actually did start behind us. And he even incorporated that into the meditation. It was just divine. And it was on this small stage in our area, and I got to meet him. So it was like, we never know what's going to happen at festivals, do we?
Yeah,
It,
it's
it
it's a very lively environment, very exciting,
there's
creativity everywhere.
I
Yeah.
think I need to come as a helper next time.
You're not
Okay.
the first to say that,
I'm
Gina. We'll
sure I'm
we'll
not, but
we'll look at the team again.
I'm
Well,
just
maybe you
making
should
my
come and
mark.
talk on the information stage,
Yeah.
I'd love to.
right?
Please make that happen.
I'll do
Wonderful.
my best.
Okay. You were talking at the beginning of the show around that there's Channel 3 and Channel 5, and Channel 3 is around, if you like, that combination of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, creative self. What's Channel 5?
I think we can both
It's the more judgmental thinking,
thinking, analytical,
analytical,
needs to work everything out. He's looking out for
needs to
us,
know,
needs to know, fearful side.
judging,
So it's left
Yeah.
brain thinking.
critical. Exactly. Now, you could look at it as just right brain and left brain, but
I know that's a bit simplistic, but I mean, for many
it's a little
people,
bit more simplistic. I think the thing is when you know when you're in those states, because we talked about Glastonbury and how magic happens at Glastonbury because people are in the flow of that
yeah,
creativity. There is an amazing sense of people being so open and loving. Let's talk about love
yeah,
because that's Channel 3. Channel 3 is pure love, and that's what we bring in our hands. That four-letter word, which tend to not talk about too much, but it is that. You can simplify it into left brain and right brain, but it's a bit more than that. So when you start to think and analyze, that's more Channel 5. That's no help to you in a treatment.
no,
And so, people sometimes want to work out why it is they feel the way they feel. Trying to work out why they feel like they feel is not feeling.
no. But
So
it's what
channel three
many
would be
people are
feeling.
used to, isn't it? Most people, I
Yes.
would suggest, are more
Yeah.
used to doing that than they are to the actual feeling bit.
Yes. And it also detaches you from that connection with yourself. As soon as you start to think about it, you're moving yourself away from that experience. So in our work, we want people to fully engage and experience with what's happening for them physically, emotionally, mentally, but more what's happening in the experience.
Yes.
So it might be they're experiencing something. We want them to fully experience that. So channel 3 and channel 5, very much left, right brain, yes. But we use it in a slightly different way, I think. We use it in terms of presence, what it means to bring that loving, connected, intuitive presence to that space.
One of the things that has struck me when I have been having treatment is that when you and Nikki and you
Yeah.
both work together, um, I just, if you're listening to this, I want you to imagine, there's two people, there's not a word being physically spoken, and yet the two of them work in absolute tandem, and then suddenly they'll move, but they both know where they're going, and there has not been any verbal communication, but they are absolutely in tune. And I'm not surprised by it because of the work that I've done in terms of my own development. But I think for somebody who is unused to that, to see that level of communication that requires no verbal speech is something that's quite unusual. And for me, that demonstrates absolute presence. Many people are so worried about the past or anxious about the future that they forget that the only thing we've got is the now. And we're
Mhm,
all guilty of it at times, I think.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
how is it, do you think, that we can help people when they're not on the table actually have the confidence to come from a place of love and connection and presence in their everyday life when people are stressed about money and relationships and jobs and everything else?
Big question.
Feeling is healing.
Mm.
You know, I'm going to be really honest here. Craig gave me a treatment this morning, and I was holding emotional emotions, and that was creating tension in my body. He gave me a treatment. I cried, like a lot of our clients cried. It was so needed, but I hadn't been, so it's that getting aware enough in your own body, taking the time, the space to connect in what's happening for me right now. How do I feel? Feeling the tensions, allowing yourself to go in there, being present with yourself, allowing yourself to release whatever it is that's there. We hold so much
People,
and
I
we don't
think,
even know we're doing it.
are frightened of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And
Can
there's
be.
that sense of, they talk about negative emotions, and,
Mm-hmm.
I can't feel anger or frustration or whatever, and they bury it, put it in the
Mm-hmm.
cave or in the box.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it stays and it wants attention, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it creates physical restrictions. I mean, that's the thing. Whatever's going on emotionally is also impacting your body. So people have pain.
Yes.
People have physical pain because they've braced, they've literally braced for years and years and years with emotions that they're frightened to let go of. Yeah.
What do you think comes first? It may that they come at the same time. Do you think that the releasing the physical triggers the releasing of the emotional, or the other way around, or do they come together?
Good question. I mean, the obviously the combination of the story that we're telling ourselves when we're not our thoughts, but this as John, it's just the way he's used to describe it, this kind of like analytical, taking care of ourselves, thinking, fearful side is reacting and telling her this story, and then this somatic element where there's this bracing, this fear holding on. So they're intertwined. I just want to kind of add that I think some of the latest science has split the kind of the areas that the brain are processing this sort of cognitive and creative side a little bit. But that bracing is really sort of stuck in the body. So it's important that the story we tell ourselves is gets to change and there's a it seems like there's a real way from that connection and letting go, helping the body to not be reliving this fearful story. I think there's a great phrase I heard recently: the body sleeps when the story ends. And I think is it in Finland maybe there's some practice where at the end of the day they'll get to ask their kids to ask them check in what hit them, kind of any sort of their emotions in that day, and then sort of hold and let go of that rather than that story continuing, so they can actually sort of rest. I've just read about this, so I'm curious to find out more. But it seems this can happen for us, that it's not that we forget what's happened, but it doesn't have to call the shots anymore if the body's still responding, reacting, and living in a brace state to protect itself, which
So,
worked at the time, but it's not serving us anymore.
so we could also talk about tissue memory. So when we connect in with the physical body, the body keeps the score. That's a book that's available, but it's also suggesting that the tissue has memory. So when we connect in physically, it's like we plug in to something that then the person can remember, recall, and release the emotion that was stuck in those tissues. That makes sense.
Because presumably, if you're not aware and you don't remember, then it stays sort of hidden away.
Well, we can talk about trauma and incomplete experiences, because a lot of the time when people hit a major trauma, so say they have a car accident or something major that happens, it's not just car accidents, lots of things happen to people in their lives. Sometimes the feeling intelligence leaves the body at that point in terms of the trauma, because that individual can't cope at that moment with the flood of emotion and content, what's happening. So in order to protect itself, to protect ourselves, it's a partial experience sometimes, and we're missing pieces of that experience. So what happens in our treatments often is that we're holding the space for somebody to actually re-experience it in a safe way. I think that's what's important here. We're giving them the opportunity to re-experience it in a safe way. And because of all the channel 3 and we're holding that for somebody. And then what happens is they can re-experience in a safe way and gather those particles so that they're whole again, so that they can let go. Otherwise, it's like walking around with a straitjacket. We're braced constantly. I actually saw a woman this morning who was braced. I mean, she lost her child at 13 months, but she literally hasn't had time to grieve that. She has 4 more children, and in her body, she was literally braced. And because she hasn't actually, she even said she's numb. So that's an incomplete experience for her. And her body is braced against the fear of something terrible like that happening again. And that's what we're carrying around with us a lot of the time. That's what John talks about. We carry this bracing for whatever we haven't resolved. And as body therapists, we come from the perspective of we put our hands on, and basically we allow that space for people to experience it, not to re-traumatize it. No. To actually become whole again from whatever is missing, so that they don't have to carry that anymore.
And I'll quickly add in there that we may through treatment, and again we're talking from experience because we're personally both of us constantly
Our own experience.
our own experience. As we said, we can only say our clients are deeply willing to go ourselves. It's ongoing, and there are some patterns. There may be an awareness of what the bracing is attached to, but oftentimes actually we don't know. The channel 5, as John describes, it may want to know. It's trying to work things out. So, and sometimes in treatment, and I think John said this, is like, it may get a bit ticked off with not calling the shots. We've got to let go, trust into our intuition, our feeling intelligence, give it a job, say, look, thank you for looking out for me. helped me to be in this state, to safely feel, to let go, to trust, to come back, to remember what it felt like to not be living, reliving and being in this braced state. So oftentimes, as I say, we might not going to have an idea of what this is attached to, what's happening in our body, and there can be a few things going on at the same time. And just to sort of refer back earlier in the conversation about our body being in different positions, we look in observation to and see what that feels like for the client to feel in their body. But a part of this process of myofascial release, John Bond's myofascial release, what can happen is this unwinding, which I think you were referring to, Gina, is when the body moves of its own volition.
Mm-hmm.
So the body is a very able to move through its own movements. It can be shaking, oscillations. It can be some of the most profound processing of the body. The body may stay still, but and then we had this just recently described in some of our training, introducing therapists with a few techniques to start off in this modality. There was stillness, but the sort of sensing that internal in their body was there was a lot going on. It was very active. But this unwinding process it's not entirely understood at all, but it's a very natural process. And when you feel that and trust that, and then with a trained therapist, you feel and are able to be held very dynamically to help you find positions in space into your body. A car accident is a good idea. Impacts and rolls. The body will have impacted. Feeling intelligence has checked out at the time to protect us. But in a safe way, the body can kind of move through that, let that kind of experience go,
Remember
Brilliant.
those pieces. Remember those pieces and come back to wholeness.